think I did. I think I did select the right mic. How do I sound, guys? Okay, sure, MV7. Yes. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tankie Therapy. I don't know which one this is, 10, 12. There is no time. It all is one jumbled mess. But I'm hosting today, which is new. Justin, the adult, he is usually the host of these things, but he had actually other adult duties to see to today. So you're all in my not so capable hands. We have two stalwart guests of Tanky Therapy who are always here, Alex and Nora. You guys all know them, but we have two new people who I'm excited to have on. Why don't you guys introduce yourself? Arama, you want to start?
Oh, sure. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm Arama, coming to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a lonely researcher and foot soldier in the movement. So, yeah, it's such an honour to see you all and to speak with you today. Kia ora.
Thank you. Mikey?
Aloha, I'm Mikey. I'm a community organizer and filmmaker living on Oahu in US occupied Hawaii. And a big fan of the show and also Tanky Therapy. And because I can't afford a real therapist, this is probably the next best thing. So
yeah, exactly. I think this is also true for me. It's like, why pay someone when I could do it for free? um, but yeah, I guess in that spirit, we're here to talk about all the traumatizing things that we've seen in the last few weeks. I mean, I say that jokingly, but I'm serious because every day is a new traumatizing experience for anyone who's watching this who isn't a psychotic Zionist freak or like people who are numb to all of this. So I guess in some ways, the way Justin usually does it is that we do a checker. We sort of do a, around the, what's it called in baseball? Around the horn. We pass the ball around and we see how everyone's doing. So I'm just going to start with you, Alex, because you're the one closest to me on the screen. You want to tell us how you're doing, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. I mean, not much has changed in terms of how I'm doing. I'm sure same for the rest of you. Every single day manages to show us a new horror, a new, just terrible thing. Like a little while ago, I just read about a Palestinian woman in Gaza who had tried for 10 years to have kids, finally had twins, and the twins were killed in an airstrike. And it's just, fuck, man. Like, yeah. And so every day just brings something more terrible, more horrific, and it just more rage, as we've talked about. A lot of rage, a lot of I don't know. I think a couple of episodes ago when we actually had a real therapist on, I can't remember her name. Sorry, I apologize. But she talked about Lara. Yeah, she talked about how that it was, I guess, that it was good to have to rearrange your everyday schedule in terms of as a way to engage with what's been going on. So I don't know if that's actually helping me, because like the first thing I do when I wake up is check that little stupid machine that we all use to see like the horrors that just happened, and then we can watch a genocide in real time, and then at the same time I have to watch a psychotic old man eat ice cream, talking about, in between licks, talking about there's going to be a ceasefire, which was an obvious lie, right? So it's this weird, just constant moving from like extreme sadness to extreme rage, and not knowing how to ever balance them out or get to like a healthy middle. Even with my own work, I guess what always helps me is the support of my family and stuff that I have to do on an everyday level, like with my kids. But yeah, I just think, we can talk about this more, but a couple of things that really stood out to me this week. Two photographs that I saw, one that I didn't want to see and I'm never going to forget. The first one is a picture of an IDF soldier who's in a baby crib hugging a big stuffed, I think it was like a Tweety bird stuffed animal, which is just so insane. I mean, we've seen a lot of these, right? A lot of these IDF soldiers apparently are underwear perverts, which I'm not like, it's just I'm restricting. Yeah, I'm restricting my shame and disdain for that particular group. And the second photograph that I really didn't want to see, because I'd seen people discuss it and then it just like popped up on my feed, and It's about the Palestinian man who apparently was just run over by a tank, and you had zip ties on his hands yet still. And I don't. That's just, yeah. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, that is just. I research horrific things, right? Like I research like Mexico's drug war. Like I've seen really awful videos and for a long time. So I would, I think no, I'm like kind of immune to this kind of stuff. But that photograph was just, yeah, man, I don't know what to do with it. It's pretty horrific, and I think, but at the same time, the other thing that I've been following is there was a recent summit, the CELAC summit in the Americas, and the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, as always, comes through with, I think, really powerful analysis when he tells the rest of his Latin American and Caribbean fellow heads of state that what's happening in Gaza is like the future for the entire global South. To paraphrase him, he said something like, "If we don't do what they want us to do, this is what's going to happen to us." And I think obviously we've talked about this, and we can hopefully maybe chat about it later. But this whole post 1945 rules-based international order is being exposed for what it never was and what it always was. It was just a different colonial system. It was a different way to present what Du Bois talked about, the international color line. And Gaza is this global crossroads of history coming together. And we see that the evil empire all along was not the Soviet Union, was the United States, for one. And then two, we see people against all odds, at great risk to their lives, like the Yemenis, come through and show by example what the rest of us are supposed to be doing when we see a genocide happen, which is to actively participate to stop it. So that still gives me a lot of hope. And I guess that's what I'm trying to cling on to these days.
Thank you for that. Nora?
Yeah, I that happened to me too, Alex, when I had been seeing for like a day or so people talking about that photo of the man run over by a tank, and I was like, whew, I hope I don't I hope I don't see that photo. And then it popped up, and yeah, I don't know. Like you, I mean, I thought I was inured to seeing that amount of I just like just how a human being can turn into an unrecognizable form. I thought that I had seen the worst things in my life already during these 5 months and during the 20 years that I've been covering this. But that photograph broke something inside of me that was already kind of hanging on by a thread. And I think it's just the way that in any other context besides Palestine, that photo could have, I don't know, ended any other war, or gotten people to do something, and yet, like, that was just one of 50 horrifying things that we saw that day alone. And then the flower massacre, and then the flower massacre again today on Sunday. The whole, like, I just felt sick to my stomach this whole week, where, I mean, I'm researching the ongoing engineered starvation of, especially how children are dying of starvation, especially in the northern areas of Gaza. And then to see, those aerial photographs of, like, literally thousands of trucks ready to distribute, food and diapers and anesthesia and bandages and fucking fuel and, produce, just lined up at the crossings. And the US is
letting Israel keep them closed and keep those aid trucks sitting idling at the crossing. Everything's going bad, and then Biden has the fucking audacity to like talk about how the U.S. is helping alleviate, people struggling for food in Gaza by airdropping fucking expired meals into the sea, like watching Palestinian children like swimming into the frigid ocean in the, like trying to, I don't know. I feel like, I mean, we've been saying this for the last 5 months, but like, I really feel like I'm going insane. That we're seeing the worst thing we've ever seen in our lives, amplified a million times every single day, relentlessly. We're seeing, that's like senile old man licking ice cream, talking about a fucking ceasefire just so that he could get, like 10 more people in Dearborn to vote for him. I mean, that day when Biden said casually, over ice cream at NBC Studios, that there was going to be a ceasefire by the end of the weekend. That news traveled all over Gaza. I mean, we talked to someone in Gaza on the EI live stream on Wednesday. This incredible reporter, Abu Bakr Abed, who's like young and energetic, and he's immunocompromised, and he hasn't eaten fucking anything, and he's trying to do his job and stay alive, and he was like everybody's expecting the ceasefire that Biden talked about. Like, we can't wait another day. Like, we just want it to end, and to just the monstrous cruelty that the Biden administration is like doling out. Like the white liberals lost their shit when Trump went to Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and he started like throwing paper towels into the crowd. Like, they were like, that is so dehumanizing and demeaning and cruel and depraved. And like, what a sick fuck. How is this any different, if not in, 1,000 times worse? Airdropping expired food that'll feed like 35,000 people, maybe, out of 2.3 million, while you have aid trucks stuck at the fucking crossings, like giving people under this siege, under these bombs, under carpet bombs, under fucking massacres at trying to get flour, like giving them this like false hope. I don't know. Anyway, something broke inside me this week, and I'm trying to figure out how to put it back together. I don't know. I don't know how to be a person these days. I feel like I'm like barely functioning. I feel like everything I'm doing is like wholly inadequate, and I'm just in like a very I'm not well. I'm not well this week. Hopefully next week will be better. But that's me. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I've been feeling that same sense of something being constantly broken inside me for quite some time now. At the beginning, after Al-Aqsa flood, the things that I would see in my little screen in my pocket, I would be crying like up to 3 times a day, to the point where I would have to sleep with my phone in the other room so that I wouldn't just keep doom scrolling like all night, and do it another 2 hours in the morning when I wake up, and then there was a point where I think a lot of people have experienced this, where I was concerned that I was starting to feel like Nora said, inured, like desensitized to some of the imagery that we should not alone never have to see, that people should never have to show, but also that we should never have to feel like we are being desensitized by. I do not want to be desensitized by this, and yet I felt that. And I think it wasn't until, you know, Aaron Bushnell's martyrdom and the first flower massacre that I started to feel those feelings very intensely again. And seeing that man in zip ties run over by a tank where all of his insides are outside. That I said this earlier when things were first starting to happen, when these two little kids, I think some of y'all have seen this video where their hands are shaking from the adrenaline and they don't understand what's happening to them because they're little kids, right? And this littler kid is showing that, you know, to their older sibling, like what's happening to their hands, because they need somebody to witness and understand that. And that moment, I felt like we have what I like to picture as kind of like a spiritual cabinet of some kind, where we have like a bunch of kind of like sacred objects that we keep there that are really fragile and that grandma tells you you can look at but never touch, right? And I feel like every day the IOF like grabs one of those off of that cabinet and just smashes it on the ground. And then we have to try to figure out, can we even put this back together, right? And it really speaks to just how Israel has basically become, you know, our era's Nazis. They are every single line that we as kind of like a global human community have kind of collectively agreed, even beyond international law, but just kind of like our basic moral norms, have agreed not to cross. They're crossing it deliberately, right? Because this, just like with the Nakba, where they would liquidate an entire town and then record screams and put them on loudspeakers on trucks and drive through the towns so that people would leave, so that, you know, they wouldn't even have to bother liquidating them, right? And exterminating them. I feel like that is partly why they are doing all of the things that they're doing now, escalating their depravity and crimes against humanity, these unspeakable historic atrocities. And I think the only thing that I can take heart in is, you know, the resistance access, what, you know, this amazing united front, this incredibly organized and disciplined united front is accomplishing through Hamas and PFLP and DFLP and Al-Quds and Palestine Islamic Jihad and Ansar Allah and Hezbollah. And I think like the thing that also, I was talking about this last night with some comrades, a lot of people, I think, on Turtle Island and in other kind of like Western occupied places, there's this feeling of despair or a sense of just constantly not doing enough, and feeling that, you know, the protests aren't working, even the boycotts aren't doing what they need to do, because nothing's stopping, right? The IOF is escalating constantly. And I think, and hopefully we can talk about this later, but I think many of us have been drawing the wrong lessons, especially as communists, about like what the type of lessons we should be learning from this are. And I think it's primarily that our failure is that we weren't organized enough to stop it before it happened, before it started happening. Within the first week of this bombing, we should have been collectively organized enough. There should have been some kind of party or parties that were organized enough to put a chokehold on the American economy. We should have been able to press our collective boot, you know, on the jugular of American capital and been able to stop this in days, if not weeks. And I think the lesson is not, oh, we just need to constantly be doing protests with diminishing returns and no or else connected to the demands. And I can understand why Palestinians who particularly those who are not organizers, consistently call out the failure to extract any concessions from all of the actions that people in the U.S. Imperial Corps are engaged in or not engaged in. But unfortunately, the answer, doesn't align with our normative principles of wanting this to end tomorrow, right? What the only solution is going to be to organize, which takes time, which isn't largely visible. Organizing in our communities to build the kind of power that will eventually be strong enough to stop this, maybe a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, if we're lucky, right? Because organizing doesn't happen overnight. Mobilizations happen overnight. And the strongest mobilizations are results of deep concerted organizing. So that's what I take heart in. That's what keeps me from despair. And I think as an organizer who organizes around connected issues like water protection, right? Like anti-imperialist work in one of the bellies of the beast in the Pacific. I take heart in the fact that like a lot of people who we are organizing, who have no connection to any kind of like left theory of change or anti-imperialist politics, are connecting those dots, and they are also affected by the U.S. empire, but in different ways. And seeing them being incredibly willing to want to work towards engaging in the type of solidarity work that will lead to a free Palestine. I'll kick it off to Arama.
So much to reflect on there. It's interesting. I've heard this kind of come up a lot in different Indigenous groups, where we have this really strong concept of what we call here in Aotearoa the whānau pani, or the bereaved family, the principal mourners, and just this real idea and understanding that when something, usually not as extreme as what we're seeing right now, but when something extreme is happening, then that as those around the people who are most directly affected that need to snap into action and mobilize, and it's like you kind of put off your own emotional responses while you're trying to support those who are most affected. And so it's quite interesting being in this space, because we don't often ask each other how we are doing, because we understand that there are people struggling with this so much more than ourselves, obviously those people in Palestine and also in the diaspora. So yeah, it's interesting to have a space where we're able to come together as well and check in. And when it comes to like mental health, it's been really interesting seeing the news footage come out where they reported on Aaron Bushnell's martyrdom, and then they offer this helpline that you can call as though what he was struggling with was some like individual disease or mental health issue that he was grappling with on his own. And so just to see the way that the kind of mental health industry is usually there to kind of prop up capitalism and keep us all productive within the current system's quite interesting. And just earlier today, I saw a social media post by someone called Ayed Abu Yusuf, I think his name is, and he just had a rant. It's like, we don't need a psychologist. A free Palestine is our psychologist. A ceasefire is our psychologist, which is not to take away the fact that lots of people actually do need like professional help that is understanding of imperialism and colonialism at this time. But just this kind of way in which people who are struggling with this are being pathologized, when really, as this social media post kind of points to, it is those people who are so dehumanized at this point that they can drop bombs indiscriminately, that they can celebrate these depraved acts and war crimes that we're seeing. It is those people who are in need of the psychological help. It's also been interesting just reflecting on our own history as Māori and Aotearoa who have gone through a genocide when, you know, there was no word for it when we experienced it because it didn't exist. It wasn't really happening, you know, in the minds of those who kind of control the discourse. And we usually kind of, the way in which we often commemorate the atrocious events in our own history is we understand what day of the year that those things happen, and on those days we might come together. And it wasn't until we were having the sesquicentennial commemorations when we understood just how close in time those things took place. And we were getting exhausted just going to all the commemorations in such close succession, and understanding that these were not discrete events in history, but part of a broader campaign. And so often what happened to us is downplayed and talked about as though it was just like, oh, it was just disease because, you know, you had something wrong with your immunity, you know. So there's this way in which that is used against us. And just seeing the really deliberate way in which conditions of disease and ill health are created and designed by colonizers to eliminate us helps us understand that that is very intentional. And just, you know, I think the images that I've been grappling with the most with what's happening at the moment is, you know, we hear so often, you know, is it Muhammad al-Kurd, the poet, recently spoke, and he talked about us updating each other with the number of casualties, like the weather. Like it's 25 degrees and sunny, and it's 30,000 people who have been killed at this point, kind of thing. But as we've been hearing that those figures growing higher and higher every day as we enter the 5th month of the genocide, we often then break down, okay, and 2/3 of those, we know that 2/3 of those are women and children, you know. But now in this stage of what we're seeing, as I think Alex mentioned, is those who are now dying of malnutrition. Of course, it's not going to be just 2/3 that are women and children anymore. You know, we know that it's the most vulnerable. Just these images of children, of babies being starved, I think are the ones that I find really hard. You know, anyone who's had a child and knows the vulnerability of a newborn and the desperation of mothers to provide the nutrients to allow your child to survive. It's just horrific to watch that and to understand that now it always has been a war on children, but now more than ever, it is those we should be protecting that will suffer the most with what's happening.
Thank you for that, Arama. Thank you for that, everyone. I guess in some ways, like, it's my job to kind of bring these threads together, and this is like a recurring point for me, at least, and I think throughout these episodes, is the role of images and the role of like violent images and how they sort of communicate, and how they communicate not just like the realities and of what Israel is, and vice versa, what the resistance does, right? Like, you know, Israel bombs children, it bombs schools, it bombs hospitals, and the Palestinian resistance bombs, you know, Merkava tanks, right? So like the priorities and like the rules of the game that we imagine are rules that we know in reality, that like imperialists break all the time, and they wield those rules to their own benefit. Um, you know, like those rules are, you know, essentially non-existent, at least for you know, particularly for Zionists. And you know, I've been thinking about the sort of the dueling nature of like violent imagery, because on the one hand, like there's a reason why our media apparatus here, like our media class, actively suppress 99% of like the worst images, right? Because it's their job to run cover, not just for Zionism, um, but in general for like the Western imperialist machine, of which Zionist represents one of its kind of cutting edges, right? And one of the most important, in effect. So like there is a subtle realization, and God knows, like there are actually active suppression campaigns, like all the sort of chaos at the New York Times, like what we're seeing at CNN, so that like there is a sort of active foot, like an active effort to suppress these images from circulating, and it's working. Now, mind you, like you can go and seek out those images yourself, and they're easy to find, and they are circulating on these public platforms. But the line, like the typical thing of like, oh, it will reach the media because if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like that clearly doesn't count in the case of Palestinians, right? If anything, it's like hidden more. Like the more violence they Zionists do, like unspeakable violence, like the more they hide it, the more they harder they work. And then I thought about how Aaron Bushnell's martyrdom turned that on its head, right? He was able to use the violent imagery of self-immolation, right? Which is like a courageous act because because he was ultimately looking for, like he was making a statement with his life, right? Which is like the purpose of martyrdom, right? Is that you use your body, use this like fleshy thing that we've been imbued with and like consciousness, and he actively harmed himself and died, right? Like the ultimate sacrifice in order to just say the words free Palestine and to like highlight the depravity of the US. This is a US led campaign, right? Like this is not some US isn't just a passerby, like it's actively part of this. And so like I was thinking about that, the clash of that, about how images can be used to help terrorize Palestinians. Like the point of running over the guy with the tank is that we share the images and we share them and we remark upon the brutality of the Zionists. And the Zionists share them for fun and they share them on their channels and they like make a bunch of jokes and whatever. And it's done as a sort of act of um, a group, sort of like an act of kind of building community around the sadism of their political project. At the same, and it's also a communication to the Palestinian people to say that, look, this will happen to you. We have the power to do this to every single one of you, and if you don't stop resisting us, we'll keep doing it. And so, like these two, and so again, like, and again, this is something I keep coming back to in every single episode, is that this business of how the reality of this war, the like sick, depraved evil of this war is represented through, the ubiquity of video recording, right? Which, as Arama, you brought up, these tools were not available when earlier settler colonial genocides, when they were reaching their hilt, right? Like they had the benefit of doing these things in private, like the white settlers who colonized Australia, of what's modern day Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, right? Like that violent project was done away from like the sort of the eyes from the record book, so to speak. And of course, there are records of these things, and there were people who bore witness, nevertheless, and you can find them. But there's something about images and video and our ability to consume those things live that I think does something to us. So the question that like I've been struggling with, that I kick back to you guys, and I feel like we're all sort of sharing the same thing, is like, would would the mobilization against this genocide in our part of the world and against our country's sort of support for this genocide, would it be greater if the media showed even a fraction more of the truth? I grapple with this. Or would a kind of deeper software kick in for our like depoliticized neoliberal society that has this kind of numbness to it, that has this kind of like anesthetizing like power? And in fact, I think that I was saying this last night to a friend of mine who's like a filmmaker, that and like a pop culture kind of critic, who like he and I were raised on the same movies that you guys were all raised on too. um, that like the violent imagery of particularly Hollywood, like the American cultural industry, in some ways I feel like it's used to prepare us for moments like this. That like the joy and like the aesthetic pleasure that we get in these commodified images of we're gonna do an episode. I'm gonna do an episode with Alex on the Sicario movies. And part of those movies is to show that, oh, look what these cartels do to poor people, and like there is these kind of, it's just brief moments, right? But then of course we know there are all kinds of genres of American violence. There's like the horror, there's gore, there's whatever, right? And so like there's this entire wing of the US culture apparatus that exists, I think, to prepare us for moments like this, to say that, oh, like this is almost pleasurable. We're learning to see these images and we're numb to them. So like that's the question I sort of am kicking out to you guys, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Like, would it be different? I'm not sure either way.
Just speaking as a filmmaker, I think what's actually interesting to me is the way that Al-Qassam in particular, their media apparatus, has used kind of like Western film grammar, like the narrative of
Michael Bay music, Michael Bay movies, music. Yeah.
Bayhem. So they have taken even down to the types of edits and filters and the way that they cut certain action scenes. But of course, what we're actually talking about is like their revolutionary actions. The way that they have used that to not just reach their own audience, but I think to speak to like a global audience, particularly using Western tropes, but in a really maximally effective way. I would say Ansar Allah does this incredibly well too. That has actually been really fascinating to see, because there has been no clearer good guys, I think, in our entire lives. Like, particularly when Yemen comes and like drops down with, you know, like the Palestinian and Yemeni flag on the back of their helicopter, and when a fucking guy with like a Yasin 105 like waits for a bulldozer to barrel through people's zinc-roofed homes, and to see them just fly that RPG right into the cockpit of that. It's like, these are the fucking Ewoks in Star Wars. You know, it's like these are objectively good guys, indigenous people who are protecting their land, protecting their home, protecting their people. And I think this is precisely the type of thing that particularly US and Western media generally do not want people to see, or at least not to see it in any kind of objective way, to kind of like mediate those images through passive language, or not showing them at all, or contextualizing them in the, you know, all of the bullshit about the Nova massacre and October 7th being bad. But speaking to that, your other kind of question about whether if things were reversed, we would be seeing more headway in terms of movement on the ground in the Imperial Core if these messages were spread more honestly. And I kind of feel two ways about that, because one, they wouldn't be doing it if there wasn't an express and important purpose. But on the other hand, if they stopped using passive language, if they stopped, you know, basically echoing, you know, IOF communiques and bullshit accounts of certain events, I still think that in the end, there are no amount of mobilized people on the ground that will actually have any impact, unless we start as kind of like the entire kind of like European, US, and neo-colonial subjects start to really strategize around choke points of capital in really strategic and intentional ways. And barring that, I don't see how more awareness alone is going to get us to the point where we actually start seeing movement. But I will caveat that as well, because I think here's another thing that I think we are underestimating about the level of consciousness that people have on this issue. I can think of, like, just off the top of my head, like 3 separate incidents where I've been so siloed in my Twitter algorithm and the people that I talk to and listen to, that many times I just assume everybody's got to know by now. Everybody's got to know about all of these major atrocities that we are seeing over and over and over again. But it's because we're seeing the retweets like 10 times, right? And so we make these assumptions about what media people are being fed. But like, I have a really close friend, for example, like, he is not super political at all, but he goes on a lot of these kind of like pro bono jobs in movement work with me, because he's in video too. And, you know, he has a big following on Instagram, but his algorithm is completely different. So one day we're working on this project and I'm editing, and in the meantime, I'm just like, hey, you heard what's going on in Gaza recently? And he's like, no, what? And I just start talking, and I'm editing as I'm talking. And then I hear a sniffle, and I turn over, and his eyes are wet with tears. He has not heard anything. And I was just rattling stuff on like on autopilot, because it was just like, oh, everybody knows about this, and if you don't, it's like just like, yeah, you'll at least half of the the picture. And I think that's what's going on with a lot of people. Their media consumption is either minimal to none, or their algorithm has so siloed them off from what's actually going on there that they don't know. So yeah, while I do think that there's a really low ceiling through which more awareness can achieve things, I think we also have to be really mindful about the fact that a lot of people just really don't know what's going on, and once they do, they get first they're shocked, they're horrified, they grieve in real time, and then they get angry. So that's useful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mikey, that this whole notion, and maybe it's just something from like vestiges from our parents' generation, where they're like, every day on the news, everyone would watch the same newscast, and we'd all see the images of Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, being obliterated. And, seeing those images is what turned public opinion against the war. And that, grew into a multi-year protest movement. And then people started burning their draft cards, and there was like a big, huge thing. I mean, that's the story that at least like I was told. So I think maybe like, if only people would see that that photograph of the unrecognizable shape of a human, who was run over by a tank while he was zip tied. There's that thing where it's like, well, everybody's got to see this, and then they'll know. But then it's like, well, but then what? Like, we're so in it. We're in a different, we're such, I feel like it's a polar opposite place that we're in, from 50 years ago, where the media has been so consolidated with power, where the weapons companies are giving press releases to news anchors, and they read it as stated fact, where Israel is literally dictating dictating the news to the New York Times is just taking their word for it and running with it, and manufacturing consent for this. And yeah, it's like without a real left, there is, without a real organized left with with access to levers of power, I don't know what good it is, in the short term to when people see what we're seeing, then then they'll do something. I wish that were true, and I agree with you that that's not really where we're at. But I think like when we do our EI live streams, I mean, we're constantly getting messages that like, oh, this is the first time I've ever heard of your program and your website, and I didn't know any of this beforehand, and YouTube just recommended it to me. And like, I think when people finally become aware of what's happening in Palestine, and they can take that to their families and their communities, and I mean, maybe that's how movements are built. But yeah, it's like it's so slow, so slow, and it points out just the decrepitness of an anti-war movement in this country. Like, what power do we, what is the chokehold that we could engage in? Right now it's there's little like islands of that, like the folks here in the Bay Area who refused to let a cargo ship headed to deliver weapons to Israel load at the port, working with the Longshore Workers Union. And then we have people chaining themselves to each other outside of Nancy Pelosi's office and home, and like these acts are really important, and we can't let up. And at the same time, it's like without an actual organized left, we're just kind of working independently, and we're reactive and not not in an offensive position.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think imagine how like the how maximally effective port blocking would be if they were coordinated across states and nations, right? And imagine like if we could actually build toward an organized anti-war left, anti-imperialist left that was that organized, where if the word went out through various lines of communications that on this day, like this particular artery of capital would be cut off. That is something that you cannot not cover, right? If it's one port, it's like gets it on the local news and maybe some national news outlets that are incredibly biased. But if it is not just nationwide, but like an international strategic blockade, that's entirely different. But that takes a level of organization that we are nowhere near yet. But that I think we have to organize toward that, not just for Palestinians, but just for our collective liberation generally. And even though the messaging, the use of powerful images and the use of one's own body through multiple self-immolations, yes, those did have a major impact. But I think history has taken, even the progressive like view of Vietnam protest history has taken a kind of like Alinskyite view of this, right? Where it's like, there's just a few very visible professional activist class of people who kind of like led this anti-war movement charge, when it was like, no, the left was way more organized. Even in the sorry state that it was back then, it was leagues more organized in the US and in other complicit countries than we are now. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that organized labor hadn't been eviscerated yet, right? So I think I think it's good that we're making these connections, because I think it's starting to kind of like illuminate like what the value of deploying and utilizing certain images are for the necessary work of educating and agitating people who we need to organize, who are outside of our political bubble. Yeah. So because in order to have those levers of power, you need to have workers who work with those levers, right? Which is not to say that there aren't people who are radicalized within all of the types of jobs that have the ability to shut off the flow of capital, but we definitely don't have an organized left within those spaces in order to be able to do that. And I think that's something that we can strive for.
Yeah, and just making me think of like the NGOification of all of our social movements, and the role that's playing with what we're seeing, where our most experienced activists are often campaigning within NGOs that on Palestine have been very, very weak because they're worried about their funding being cut off.
So can I do sorry, I'm a historian, so can I do the historian thing for like 2 seconds related to your questions, Sina? Indigenous resistance movements are dealing with fraught ideological constructs that go back like more than 500 years, right? The idea that the complete dehumanization of indigenous resistance movements has always been part of like the colonizer prose of counterinsurgency, right? Like one idea that is always there is, and you see it from Hernán Cortés against Tenochtitlan to now, which is these indigenous, they're not a resistance movement, and these indigenous peoples do not think about or appreciate life the way we do, right? Like Westmoreland has that famous quote from the Vietnam War, right? Like the Oriental doesn't value life the way that we do, as they're the ones committing horrific genocidal war crimes. Like Hernán Cortés, if you read his accounts, like the letters he was sending back to Charles V, like how he's trying to, well, one, he was trying to save his own ass, right? Because he was technically an outlaw. But the other one, which is another thing, right? Colonizers are criminals. But the way, like he doesn't, like he commits horrific violence. He has indigenous allies that are helping him take out the Mexica, Mexico Tenochtitlan. but then he assigns a cruelty and a devaluing of life, not to him and his forces, but to his indigenous allies, right? He called, and especially when they finally managed to take over Tenochtitlan. You see that all throughout. But then so these indigenous resistance movements always have to use the tools that are available to them to go against that kind of ideological work, right? And in Latin America, from the 30s up until the 70s and 80s, resistance movements and revolutionary movements were really good at using radio, right? Because radio was the method of technology that they could use to reach a broad audience, to be like, hey, we're still here, we're kicking ass, this is what we believe in, don't listen to what the US and their compradors in Latin America are saying about us. And I do think there is something really powerful, like Mikey, the example that you mentioned, that video of that bulldozer just tearing that house apart, someone's home, someone's like space that they've, like, we know what home signifies, right? And this fucking bulldozer that was probably built by Caterpillar is just destroying it. And this guy jumps out and takes it out. That, I think, does a lot of ideological work in undoing decades of dehumanization of Palestinian lives and resistance. I think. I mean, I don't want to. I'm not. I recognize the problems with it. I agree that awareness isn't going to solve the problem, as we've been discussing. But we've, like, especially I'm talking about the global north, the way that people have been trained to think about Palestinian resistance since the 1940s. Right? And then you see an image where the stakes of the conflict are very clear. A guy, the videos of the guys going up to the tanks and literally putting the bombs on the tank and running away, contrasted to a bulldozer running over people's houses or the bombing of innocent civilians. Right. Like, I think that's, organizing is about meeting people where they're at, right? And then, like, trying to get them somewhere, instead of like being condescending or how, like, why aren't you where I'm at? And I think those images and those videos are very clear in showing, like, like Mikey said, who the good guys are and who are the brave ones. I think John Elmer talks about this all the time in the EI live streams, right? Like, you see the one side that's taking out tanks and Caterpillar bulldozers, and then you see the other side taking out homes, taking out civilians, waging a genocidal war of starvation right now. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sina, but, like, I think these resistance movements have a lot of 500-year plus ideology that they are working against, and they're using the technological tools at their disposal to both do that ideologically, but also in practice. And I think it has been, I mean, think about the Iraqi resistance in 2004, 2005. They didn't have any of this, right? And it was really easy in the US, I'm old, I still remember these times, to demonize and to cast all Iraqi resistance movements as like Al-Qaeda. When it was much more, we know it's much more complicated than that. People were resisting the occupation of their home, of their homeland. So I don't know. That doesn't answer your question, but I think about it in those terms. I think it's a useful tool, and it's been extremely useful, I think. But it is, to go back to Mikey's points, it's going to take a really long time, and there's an urgency that tells us we don't have that time, because we have people who have already died, and we have very fast forms of violence that we're witnessing, and then the slow, like what geographers refer to as slow violence, right? Those kids who are malnourished, they're never going to be able to recover from that malnutrition, which is like horrific and to think about. So there's that weird, like, difference in time and time scale, I guess.
That was a really good point. I appreciate all those things. I mean, Mikey, the first thing you said was about how, and I've thought about this a lot, if only because this is like something that Jay and I do from Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. We noticed the Michael Bay music, like the music from Michael Bay, from like The Rock specifically, they reuse it. And it's like, and you're right that, like, the format of the American action movie, which, like, America used to help sell itself ideologically, but also to help pacify its own population to the immense violence. Like, what's the thing that the magician does, where they distract your attention? What's the word I'm looking for? Like, where they, like, put your attention somewhere else while they're doing something else. What's the word? I keep searching for this word. Like, it's like an act of, what's the word? Like, it's not dissuasion. I don't know. Somebody come up with it.
Oh God. No,
It's
I
the
know
act.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
like, and that's what you use like an assistant
Jesus.
for, right? It's like you get them to focus on something else. And I wonder if like there is a part of the American culture industry which functions just for this purpose, is that you get your kicks like watching the latest from, the CIA ideology mill, right? Like through whatever, or, like John Krasinski fantasizing about being an agent or whatever. Like that's just Orientalism too, right? Like that's a facet of Orientalism, is to just take aesthetic pleasure and cultural pleasure in our imperial dominance and imagining the different scenarios that you yourself could be in, which is like the Total Recall thing, which is why Total Recall is an amazing movie, right? Because he doesn't actually go through all those experiences. He's not actually a spy. Like it's just part of the story. Like it's all a dream by the end.
Jim from The Office will liberate Venezuela one day.
Yeah,
Don't come on.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, and Pam will be there too. Like,
Oh,
and it's crazy, but like, but then at the same time too, is that you realize that like the Palestinian resistance has itself become, let's say, like a victim or like a consumer of this Hollywood culture, because like they thought those movies were cool too, or at least they thought the music was cool. But you're right. I think, Mikey, is that they've internalized these formats and these like action movie cues to be like, look, it's not a movie, it's real life. It's like dudes in Adidas track pants holding up like homemade RPGs against a like billion-dollar army that has its like weapons flown in every day from its like Yankee sugar daddy, right? That like they enjoy and that itself is a message to Zionist settlers who are part of the IOF. They say, oh, you want to fuck around and come out? You want to destroy our every facet of our lives? You're going to lose your legs. You're going to roast inside of a tank. Like, think about that for a second. So, like, you don't see those psychological calculations, I feel, that like the Palestinian resistance has used media to that effect. And it's also because like I keep going back to this media question because ultimately I'm like a textual person. Like I think in terms of texts and criticism and reading and rereading and close reading. And so like because I'm not there and because I'm not like Palestinian and I don't have like a familial and, let's say, like originary sort of foothold in any of this, like I don't come from a village that was depopulated or whatever, right? Like so that the texts themselves, in this case the images and the news and the updates and the speeches, they become the main vehicle for me understanding this war, this genocide, right? And I guess the for me, like what's crazy in my head is that like our media just doesn't show it. Like that's it. Like even, and it's actually funny, they would have improved ratings, which is their ultimate goal, you think, right? Like you're trained to think that like, oh, they're just in it for the money. Like that's all they care about. That's why they promulgated Trump. Like that's why it worked, in those era. But it's like they would rather not show and not get the ratings because imperialism is more important than ratings. That like standing by as this genocide goes on, even though it like, actually, Mikey, you said something in the interview with Red Nation that I'm posting tonight that was really amazing, which was you said that, this Al-Aqsa flood has forced the American empire to like take one hand off its mask and to show itself for who they are. Right. And like that is something that I was like, yeah, that's totally right. Because now they have like the next time they say women, life, freedom, the next time they say, oh, we're concerned for the people of Myanmar or whatever, like that when they pretend to care, right?
Yeah,
they're pretending.
The free people of East Turkestan, right?
Yeah. Like that machine of concern is behind is like the narrative framework for so much immense imperial violence. So that
we have a counterexample. We have such a clear counterexample, which is what?
Exactly.
Right. I mean, that's even when Ukraine started, you had global South nations say basically, watch what's going to happen. And now we have this horrific genocide going on in Gaza. The contrast could not be more clear at this point. But it's about convincing people in the global north, right? Like to get them to recognize that mask is off, that you have Biden kissing an Italian fascist prime minister on the forehead. Like if I ever like the socialism or barbarism thing, like that photograph represents the barbarism side of the equation, right? Yeah. And we didn't get a chance to talk shit about
Trudeau did the same, right? He didn't kiss her, but
he probably wasn't sniffing her hair.
He went second, so he had to wait his turn, and then he had to do like as Sina always calls him, the junior partner of U.S. imperialism.
Exactly.
Right? But the contrast is there, and like from the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, global South nations were like calling this out, and then what, Gaza happens, and now the contrast is there.
Yeah, it's crickets. It's crickets. And what's interesting too is that on Ukraine specifically, they got bored after 6 months. It's like the Toy Story meme. Like they're like, I don't want to play with you anymore. And it's like dropping like the blue and yellow flag. And and like right, look what happened to Ukraine. Like it's lost what 35% of its territory. It's a disaster. That war has been a disaster for Ukraine. Like the future of Ukraine is now as a sovereign state is basically like is questionable because they've lost not just like a lot of land but critical land with resources, with immense amount of people, with like a core of their population. And because Victoria Nuland hates Putin and they wanted to just like play, it really is toy soldiers for these goons. It just is toy soldiers. It's just monsters playing with toy soldiers. And like in terms of like the Ukraine thing, solidarity was like the fiction of solidarity was the media's role, right? It was like, oh, let's show our support for a neocon proxy war, like, and by putting Zelensky's TV show on Netflix for free and like putting it into the algorithm, like just this crazy stuff.
Sending
And now,
Sean Penn over there to
oh my gosh, Sean
Yeah.
Penn, the angel
walk
of
around.
death.
Yeah, just ask El Chapo about Sean Penn. He truly is the angel of jail.
Like, so it's like it's something that's I struggle with, that like the depravity of our supposedly caring culture, right? Which is the opposite of caring. It's like no, ruthless power and how to manufacture consent for it. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, we should talk about, I think we should also talk about, we should cover the flower massacres, um, and because we sort of alluded to them, because there may be some people who are listening to this who haven't heard, but also at the same time, and I think it links to like the larger conversation we're having too, is that how the media aspect of this war and representing the violence of each side and communicating that back and forth is part of the game here. That like warfare is, let's say, mediatic, and the point of arranging this like 4 a.m. aid convoy, which was just to use as a lure to then shoot 100 people dead, right? Like that is an act of mediatic violence, because you're supposed to show how ruthless you are, that like nothing will stop you in your ruthlessness, that there are no red lines. And of course that's not new for Israel, but it's that also that it does so in the face of Western like concern for the violence, right? That it like this is one of those moments that Mikey you were saying, is that like the mask comes off, that they just like do this stuff. And so like I think if anything, maybe Nora, you guys have covered EI. Maybe you can fill us in on like the sort of the W5 of what happened. And because it is like unfortunately one of the sort of landmark moments in this genocidal war.
Yeah, I mean, where to start, right? So, so for months, the Israelis have severed northern half of Gaza from the southern half of Gaza, and this was after, of course, like the first couple of months of them trying to push Palestinians into the south. We had all of these like these propaganda efforts saying that Israel won't bomb the south, that you'll be safe in the south, you have to leave Gaza City and Jabalia refugee camp, which is the largest refugee camp, and Beit Hanun and all Shati refugee camp, all these places that are like full of people, half the Gaza Strip. So some a million people have fled to the south, but there still is 400,000 people in the north, because why should they go? Why should Israel be able to tell people where they can and can't go in their own fucking country anyway? A lot of people remained, obviously, and some have been have tried to trickle down to the south in the last few weeks and have been executed by the Israeli soldiers and all of these snipers and the tanks stationed everywhere. And they've set up all these checkpoints. I mean, it's full on Nazi Germany. It's Nazi Israel. And so what they've also done is, since the very beginning of the year, so we're now 3 months in, the Israelis have, in order to punish those who stayed in the north, they have cut off the northern area from all deliveries of humanitarian aid. Now, this is not Israel's humanitarian aid. Israel is not providing aid. This is international, UN agencies and different, UN member states sending. Now there's literally thousands of trucks at the crossing, like I said. But Israel has said, no, we're gonna engineer this starvation in the northern Gaza Strip. And there's been something like 95% of all the humanitarian aid missions that have been planned to the north have been denied by Israel. Every once in a while, there is a truck that comes through. And people, through word of mouth, because of course communication has been cut for the last 5 months on and off, but especially, 3 months now, we're into 3 months of like a continual cutting off of communications. It spreads by word of mouth that there is going to be a truck delivery. This is, people are literally starved. They've been eating animal feed. They've been eating weeds that grow in certain areas. They've been, newborns have been dying in their parents' arms from starvation. This is an engineered, deliberate starvation campaign by Israel. So the word of mouth spread that there was going to be a truck of flour that back in January, I don't know if this is from the same convoy, but back in January, Israel did say to the U.S., after the U.S. begged and pleaded, because the U.S. is so humanitarian, to let these aid flour trucks through. Ben-Gvir, the national security minister and genocidal fascist maniac, was the one who stepped in and said, no, we're not going to let any of these flour trucks in. Anyway, one flour truck, there was, I think, like maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 trucks were let in at like 4 a.m, and people had been waiting. They gathered around, and Israel mowed them down. There were snipers stationed very nearby. You see the drone footage that the Israeli army released that they edited heavily to erase the footage recording of them sniping people in cold blood. And then they said that yes, it's so sad Palestinians died because they were trampled, and basically like they're barbaric savages who don't care about each other, and they just trampled each other, and like, in this very like sadistic Nazi-ish way. And meanwhile, people are, people who went to get a bag of flour for their children ended up not coming home at all. So that was Thursday? And then today it happened again. There was another, very small convoy, and Israel opened fire again. I think in the same area in Gaza City. So what it shows is that this was, just like the Al Ahli hospital bombing at the very beginning of this, back in October, when Israel bombed a hospital, and then all of Israel's sycophants and its ministers said, well, that's crazy. Israel would never bomb hospitals. That's blood libel. That's an anti-Semitic trope. We would never bomb hospitals, right? And then what happened, right? They've bombed every single fucking hospital in Gaza. The same thing happened here, where Israel gets to kind of dip its toe into a new like phase of this massacre, of this genocide. Oh, maybe we can just like, watch the starving Palestinians, try to get a bag of flour, and then we can just pick them off, like shooting fish in a barrel kind of thing. And if people are gonna let us do that without much condemnation, then we're just going to do it again. And so that's kind of what that is, exactly what we've been seeing. And meanwhile, the Biden administration gets to drop these like meager, depraved, pathetic, and disgusting, aid packages from the air, and then say like, oh well, we did the thing, we did what we could. It's yeah, it's sickening. It's sickening.
Yeah. Yeah, just thinking about, like you were talking about, the idea of the power of images, and there are these moments where, I mean, images always sit within like an ideology that you use to kind of interpret that, and so many of the images that we are seeing and that we are horrified by and that are radicalizing us to stand in solidarity with Palestine are also being used by Zionists to celebrate and glorify and dehumanize. And so often, yeah, it really depends on how, on the ideology that image sits within. And it kind of made me start thinking about a conversation that Mateo and Justin were having on one of his sit reps, where um, they were talking about like Mearsheimer and colonial projects, and whether or not they exist for any material ends, or whether they are justified by the ideology that they exist within, or that are, and it's just that interesting relationship. You have this extreme violence that Israel wants to commit, and so then you create these contexts for creating this ideology, for reproducing this ideology. So you have these platforms where these disgusting images are being shared of mowing down, of destroying homes, of mowing down olive trees, of torturing people, and it's just interesting how, while those platforms are set up to justify the violence, they then perpetuate the violence, because now you start to wonder, well, if you're a IDF soldier, you probably want to have someone you can torture and create content about, so there's this disgusting way in which it reinforces itself. But then you have these certain images, like the bombing of a hospital, like people being mowed down and blood and flour being mixed together in the streets, that cut through ideology. And so in those moments, you have this misdirection that you were talking about before, where they're like, oh no, this was a stampede, this is how people died, And so we see this with, as Nora pointed out, we see this with the hospital, we see this with babies being neglected in a hospital, we see this with the flower massacres. And then the next time this happens, as Nora said, it becomes systematic. Once they get away with it the first time through that misdirection, it becomes systematic, and then it becomes old news. So now we hear about a hospital being bombed, and people already have this kind of seed of doubt. And so it doesn't get the kind of cut through that it should, because of that ideology. But it also just, we have this amazing intellectual here in Aotearoa called Moana Jackson, who passed away recently, and he said in a documentary called The Leech and the Earthworm that colonialism exists beyond motive. And I think what he might have been getting at there was how the ideology is created to justify material gains and material ends, but then it perpetuates itself, just as the way people would take the cross and join the Crusades, and that became something that was the end in and of itself, because there was so much glory to be had through that. And we're seeing these same kinds of things happen, I think, here. But then there are those images that cut through that. And I think platforms like the ones that you all here are creating are just so important to help spread those powerful moments that do conscientize and radicalize people. And I remember as a teenager seeing in a history book the image of the Buddhist monk Thich Kwan Duk, I think his name might have been, who self-immolated in a meditative position. That really stuck with me. And I think Aaron Bushnell's act, it's very, very difficult for that act to be misconstrued in a meaningful and significant way. And so that has had so much power. And every time we see that misdirection, we know that those are things that we really need to amplify and make sure people are aware of. And the work of like filmmakers and all of the kind of cultural products that or cultural aspects of the movement that we're seeing now. Like if I look at my Spotify, like I never would have thought that I'd be listening to the type of music I'm listening to at this point, because it has become such a big part of our lives. Yellow Goodbye and these types of tracks. Yeah, and it made me, as you were talking about, Alex, about history and the power of images and the power of subverting these narratives. My favorite movie is a movie called Utu, and it's a fictional portrayal of the colonization of Aotearoa. And in one scene, the Māori resistance fighters take over a settler's house. They kill the settler. They attempt to kill the settlers in the house. And then there's a scene of them discovering the piano, which they really didn't have experience interacting with before. And they're playing with the piano, and then they throw it out the window. And I remember watching it with a white friend, and the most animated she got through the whole movie was when these resistance fighters threw the piano out of the window of the second floor of the house, and it fell to the ground and smashed. And she's like, "Not the piano!" But it was but for Māori, when we watch it, we were like, fuck yes, like, because it's just a symbol of their like supposed superior civilization. And then we have like this whole movie called The Piano, which is about colonialism as well, and that that's a different story. But yeah, there is such power, I think, in creating a culture around those images that we're seeing.
I guess the one current example today would be not the Gaza dogs, the stray dogs, right? So instead of not the piano, it would be, not the stray dogs in Gaza, which obviously they shouldn't be suffering either. But come on, like if that comes first, that's anyway. Sorry, Mike.
That kind of reminds me of like in Do the Right Thing, right? The scene that gets white people the most heated is when Spike Lee's character throws the trash can through the window of the pizza parlor, and it's like, what about the Windows families? And it's like, yeah, there's all property
not private
destruction.
property.
Like, yeah, this is literally after Raider Rahim gets lynched by cops, right? But no reaction from a white audience for that, right, at that time. But yeah, also I want to point out that Arama just used the word that you were looking for, Sina. What a magician does, misdirection. Yeah, and I think that's another thing that I wanted to talk about in particular in Tankie therapy, because I think we need some silver lining to laugh about, is the degree to which the IOF kind of propaganda machine sucks at telling their story, because I think this has a lot to do with just like Israelis generally, is that they have existed in this state of exception and total impunity for so long that they have, I think, regressed emotionally and psychologically as a whole. If we were to understand like a body politic as a person, and I know it gets tricky when you start to personalize system-wide stuff, but I think we need to take a piece of Fanon here in terms of like understanding of mass psychology in the context of colonialism here, where like they barely even have object permanence anymore. I've compared them to like a child at a certain age, around 3 or 4, when you play hide and seek with them, and they'll go into a corner and cover their eyes, because as long as they're not making eye contact, they feel like they are hidden, right? And so we see Israel attempting to perform these magic tricks, but one, they have no plan for what the prestige is going to be. All they have is 1, the pledge, and then 2, misdirection, and then that's it. And I think it only works for outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post, who do no follow-up without considerable pressure and pushback internally and externally. So what we see is like there's a pledge to show you the barbarity of Hamas, right? Hamas, and then there is the misdirection that they say, there's terror tunnels or there are systematic rape going on, or there his UNRWA employees who are funneling the aid to the resistance, and then they make a second pledge, which is we promise to give you evidence of this, and then they don't, right? But their follow-up actions, which are justified by what is basically blood libel, they kind of undermine their own deception, right? Because they are saying they are doing this. Here's why we have to address it, because they have no humanity. And then they immediately follow that up with bombing Al-Shifa Hospital and kidnapping the director, for example, right? Or engaging in what is immediately called and accurately called a flower massacre, right? And there's no way to pull back from that. You have basically demonstrated that you are doing the very thing that you are claiming the other party, the party that you are genociding is doing. And it, again, to kind of like personalize the general, I feel like it's Darvo on a settler colonial state level, right? Where they are denying the very actions that they are committing and projecting those accusations onto the very people that they are oppressing and murdering. And I think this is one crucial reason why I think, regardless of what happens from here on, it's only a matter of time before the Israeli settler colonial project finds its logical termination, because so much of the existence of Israel was predicated upon that state of impunity in which they turned the Holocaust into a shield against any of their genocidal behaviors and their ethnic cleansing, right? And now that that shield is not only cracked, it's broken. They can't, trot out these false narratives of victimhood anymore, because they have become the oppressor, right? Like Edward Said said, like, we are the victims, right? And I think that has become more clear than it ever has before, and there's no going back to reclaiming that narrative.
Yeah, you talked about having a mask off. I think, is it Jen Marley from the Red Nation podcast? I like the way that she put it. The US has its whole entire ass out.
Yes, absolutely. Whole ass out.
Yeah, and they were forced to. They were forced to by their little Zionist ally, that they refused to ever rein in. And like, this is it. Like, Joe Biden would rather lose an election and end his political career than stop like Netanyahu. Like, that's the level of that's the Zionism level we've reached, like, in all of this. Like, it's more valuable to the US empire to help Israel make an example of Gaza, because I think, and I had this conversation with with the Abud from in a previous episode I just did. He did a fantastic point, and actually this was off mic, or this was after the episode, and we talked about how Gaza in some ways is a message to the West Bank, and it's also a message to Lebanon, it's a message to Iraq, it's a message to Yemen, it's a message to Iran, and it says that we will reduce your cities to the same level of devastation if you dare to resist us with any of the amount of fraction that the Palestinians dared to on October 7th, right? And that it's a message that the strategic force that they're using is purely it's purely abstract. Like, there's no strategy in this. Well, the strategy is the sadism. The sadism is the strategy. And it works both ways, because you communicate your sadism to your enemy and say, we have no morals here. We do not care about any red lines. So you better back down. But it also helps their own community and say, we have no red lines. We will do whatever we can, because this is what we can do to sustain our community. And I think it's the latter point. I think that is the desperation of the Zionist state, and how, if anything, that it's hurtling towards its own demise. I mean, liberal Zionism is dead. Liberal Zionism is over. There will never be another liberal Zionist in the history of the world. They can't sell this as, we have gays in the military and they have vegan boots and whatever, and like, they can't do that anymore, because they have a bunch of like frothing in the mouth psycho fascists who are their country, who are the spokesperson, who have taken control. But those psycho fascists are also like like I don't know that the individual, like I don't feel comfortable sort of like projecting the leadership onto like the individual Israeli subject. Like that's always a dangerous game in any context. However, in that sense, that like the fact that most of Israeli society thinks that not enough force has been used in Gaza, like there's like multiple polls that shows this, that even with Netanyahu being the most hated politician in their history, this is the only guy they have that unites them, right? Because ultimately, what unites Zionism is its supremacy over the indigenous person. And this is a larger lesson for settler societies, which is why they back Israel. It's not because Jews control the media or there's an Israel lobby or oh my God. It's because the settler colonialism, man, they're part of the same fucking game. But like this is, and like the EI stream with Mearsheimer was really good for this because you guys really pushed back. You guys really, really pushed back against him because the liberal mind cannot fathom what America is ultimately underneath its self-messaging. Like, which is why like the famous skit from whatever show it was is that like, are we the baddies? Like British people had to dress up as Nazis to say that. It's like, you didn't have to dress up as Nazis to do that skit. You could have just dressed up as British people. Like you could have stayed in your clothes and like not pretended to be Nazis because you are the baddies. And that realization is something that is profound. And yeah, as you said in the interview, like they're lifting the mask, and that mask coming off is actually, I would say, productive to something bigger. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a good thing that it happened because like tens of thousands of Palestinians are dead, but in the sense that like we need a collective reminder that the pretenses and the posture of our neoliberal leaders is all fake. It's all ruthless fake. Like Justin Trudeau is more of a monster than George W. Bush. Like let's just assert that because it's clear. Because monsters, at least George W. Bush was a Christian jihadi, honestly. Like there was a more honesty in the pose of George W. Bush being like, yeah, like we're gonna smoke them out of their holes or whatever, like the way he talked, right? Like there's more honesty in that. There's like a higher quality of like, okay, yeah, you're a more honest human being than the liberal who pretends to care, but ultimately shares the ruthless agenda that all Western imperialists do.
And where are they pushing us to, Sina? I mean, that's the thing too, right? Like not only that, but also they're the ones who are enabling fascism or whatever we want to call it to like consolidate itself even more, right? The person who says, the dude from Get Out who said, I would have voted for Obama 3 times if he ran again. Like that's the person who's kissing Maloney on the head, right? Like they're the one, Trudeau, like what are they enabling? They're enabling an entire legislature to applaud for an old Ukrainian Nazi, right? Like what are these 3-time potential voters for Obama enabling at the US-Mexico border? Like ironically, or maybe that's the historical mission, if you read certain literature on liberalism, they're ones making this stuff possible. All for what? In defense of what? In defense of a colonial project that we were told for a long time in the global north that there was variance of, but in practice, there was never any variance, right? So liberal Zionism was only exist at Vox, at the New York Times, but like a social base for it, like we're witnessing it, like kind of hopefully, I think, erode to some extent. At least I hope.
Oh, I was just going to say, Alex, as a historian, I think we see a lot of historians approach our histories and what was said by colonizers in good faith. And I think this just so clearly it shows us how those statements of support, our government here, joint with Canada and Australia to put out this, very weak appeal to their good friends to please maybe stop the genocide. And we see how these things actually enable the violence to continue. Joe Biden saying, oh, ceasefire, just around the corner. This enables the violence to continue. Like what Sarah Ahmed calls it, like non-performatives, those things that you state that enable you to not do what you're talking about.
Yeah, historians are awful. Just let me get that. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from an Australian anthropologist who wrote about the Mexica and the Aztecs. And she has a quote where she says, historians are the camp followers of imperialists. And she was referencing in terms of how historians have written about the conquest of Mexico Tenochtitlan. And when I I like expand that to include all historians when I teach this to my students, because I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, and speaking to this kind of like history being a front with which we have to fight and organize around, uh, um, like what story and whose story gets told and how. Uh, Sina and Alex, I think you brought up like interesting points about how these settler colonial projects have to reify each other, which is kind of partly why, right, like media organs like the New York Times reinforce the colonial narrative for Israel and vice versa, right? Even though Israel is a vassal state to the US, it can still put them in these really inconvenient positions where they have to defend the indefensible. And we see that happening like every day now. But so this is actually a question I wanted to ask Arama, is like, how do you see the way that there's maybe like do you see like a dialectical kind of like mutually reinforcing relationship between the Zionists in Aotearoa and you know by and in justifying Israel's crimes, justifying, you know, the settler colonial projects of New Zealand?
Yeah, there's so many ways that you could approach that question, and I could like talk about it at the kind of system level. But it's actually, you can talk about it in terms of individuals and draw direct lines between the Israel lobby and like in New Zealand we have the Free Speech Union and the Taxpayers Union, and these are the groups. These are the very same individuals that are attempting to come after Māori rights are the ones who are promoting Israel's agenda here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so it's I mean, I don't even have to like draw, so I don't need a conspiracy board. Like it's just a straight line between these people. Yeah.
They make it easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, it's been over an hour and a half. This was a great conversation. We should probably wind things down. I want to say something is that the people who are listening to this, you can't see Mikey's background. And in Mikey's background, there's a little screen, there's a little sign that says hope is a discipline. And I first saw that and I was like, oh, cliche. And I realized that like my own cynicism around all of this is like it seeps in and I have to actively fight it. And you have to realize that like anti-colonialism is a violent, brutal struggle. That colonialism isn't simply going to be like, okay, it's not like some wrestling match in the WWF that's curated and then they go backstage and everyone shakes hand and changes in the same locker. Like these are monsters that Palestinians are fighting, and they're armed with nuclear weapons. And they have every single tool at their dispersal that have been handed to them by even greater monsters with centuries of practice of the same monstrosities, right? That like, and this is something that I say repeatedly on the show, that like Zionism is one iteration of a larger historical process that has been engulfing the planet, that has like rewritten the DNA of our species, you know, in the most profound ways, right? And it, to me, that you in the context and part of the job of the Zionist media machine is to eradicate your hope and to make you feel like they are all powerful, that they're the Death Star, that they can just eradicate everything from you. But the fact is that like these acts of massacres are the punishment inflicted on the Palestinian civilians because their resistance forces inflict damage on these conscripts, these Zionist conscripts, because so many of them have lost limbs, that they're out of commission, that their hospitals are filled to the brim with angry and like active military censorship keeps this stuff from not just like the Western media, but the Israeli media, right? Like Israeli media is like a joke. I mean, Israel is a military base masquerading as a country. We all know this. Like it is a vastly complicated military base. And with that comes a very, very robust system of censorship. And so like the fact that all these stories leak out, so like something I just saw online is that there was here it is, a few days before Israeli captives were murdered by IDF in Shujaya, troops entered the building they were held in. They called for help, and calls got recorded on the Army K9 body cam. Now the recordings were leaked to the press by the Army without permission from the family. So like this is not like, to give you a sense of like like what Israel has made clear in all of this is like their own citizens don't mean anything to them. And like if you're an Israeli, you're like 15 years old and you're contemplating your future in this country, right? You have this option of staying there because this is like the Israeli choice. Like, what do I do? Do I go west where I'm welcome anywhere basically and do whatever I want? And I have this like robust network of support of fellow Zionists who will hire me into some stupid email job, or like that, or do I stay here and build this country? Right? Like you show yourself for what you are in these moments. And like the mask isn't just falling for our own society. The mask is falling for Zionism. And they're happy. Their political leadership is happy to sacrifice their captives. They're happy to do it. They're like, oh no, it's worth the price of genociding Palestinians. So like your values are represented. So in the midst of all this, I would say that like we have to remember this dictum of like hope is a discipline. And it's like a muscle you have to like work out. And watch resistance videos, like follow resistance news. You know, doom scrolling is good because it's important to see this stuff and to bear witness, because like as we say on this like podcast constantly, like like bearing witness is a form of resistance, like resisting oblivion, which is where like settler colonialists want to put their violence to a point, like at the end of things they want to put that into some sort of corner and hide it away. That just bearing witness to this, so that 20 years from now we're on this call, hopefully still, you know, we'll say like, remember that picture we saw of that guy who got run over by a tank? Which, by the way, I should say, these were tactics that they used in Syria, that like Syrian so-called rebels used, that they would drive trucks over like soldiers, like Syrian Arab army soldiers, aren't like they would do that, and they would film it and they would share it. And like these are tactics that like terrorist militaries use to destroy the will of their people, which is like also what like the US did in Vietnam too. So like hope is a discipline. And Mikey, I thank you for like reminding of that. And I thank all of you for this great episode and this great conversation. And Mikey and Arama, you're welcome back anytime. You guys are permanent friends of the show, and we hope to have you back. And yeah, I think I'll just I think I'll just end it there. So thanks guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aloha.